and it's the closest thing I've ever seen to a salvation scene in an anime. So I hope we get to see some of that in Trigun as well. But he's the repentant sinner. He's the thief on the cross.
And you're locked into another episode of the Leo podcast. My name is Vash, and we are back again this week, making that intersection between faith and animation and delivering those redemptive analogies you've come to know and love. If you haven't already, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe if you're not already, and hit that bell for notifications so that you're in the know anytime that we post a new video. And as always, here's my lovely and awesome wife, Rebecca.
Thank you, Josh. Happy to be here.
Well, you better be. You have no choice. But yeah, so it has been, an interesting week. Becky, you're still going through your neurofeedback. You're enjoying that, getting to see more of Nanny McPhee and how that transpires in your brain. And
well, not the Nanny McPhee part, but the neurofeedback.
Oh, yeah.
How that, yeah. It's a great movie, though.
But yeah. Well, we told you guys last week, give you just a little bit of a sneak peek of what we were going to be talking about. And we have a guest who is more than qualified to talk about this topic. So, with us is a Jane of all trades, as I like to describe her. We have Casey Covel with us. Casey, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're excited to talk about the series that we'll be discussing with you today. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and have our audience get to know you a little bit better. So, Rebecca, I'm actually going to take over this portion of the show.
Are you now?
Yes.
Wow, that's unusual. Okay.
So, whenever we have a guest on, we know this is a bit of a loaded question because it can go in many different directions. You can be as elaborate or non-elaborate as you want. But Casey, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background.
My whole life, I've loved pop culture. And so my background is in writing. I worked for Geeks Under Grace for about, I want to say 5 years. I was a writer and the editor-in-chief for the website, and I also edited the anime section specifically on the website. I've written for Beneath the Tangles, Think Christian, Area of Effect magazine. My background also includes voice acting. I currently do voice acting for audio dramas, animatics, audiobooks, and I've actually worked in the anime figurine industry, which is kind of a niche industry. This statue behind me here, actually, of Vash, is done by the company that I worked for. So that was a really neat experience. And by day, I do career counseling, where I help students at a local college determine what they want to do, whether that's writing or voice acting or designing anime statues. Nothing's off the table. So my background's very eclectic. That's kind of my professional background. But is there anything specific you'd like to know more about?
So that will kind of lead us into a little bit about the second question, but we also like to know, people of faith. So with your faith background, can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that kind of has transcended and influenced over time in your life?
Absolutely. So a part of the reason that I have such a big heart for pop culture and God has been able to use that in my life is because I was actually brought to Christ through 2 pop culture stories. One was Narnia and the other was Pilgrim's Progress. So I truly do believe in the power of stories to convey the truths of the gospel and of God. And I always say that I think we're going to talk a little bit about my cosplay, but I always say that my cosplay started as a merger of faith and fandom. Because when I was little, I used to dress up as Philippe from Beauty and the Beast, the horse, and go to church pretending to be Philippe. And my dad was the assistant pastor at the time, and he just dug it. He was like, you go, you do you. And I was so passionate about both things, about God and about pop culture. So that's been me my whole life. I've always sought out avenues to merge these 2 worlds together, whether it's going to a convention, doing anime themed devotionals, being on podcasts. like this. But that's kind of been my faith journey. Is I was raised in a Christian home, but what ultimately illuminated the truth of Scripture for me was Narnia and Pilgrim's Progress. So kind of unique story.
That's awesome. And what an amazing supportive environment that you grew up in, that your dad just really allowed you to express your creativity in that way. That is really cool.
Yeah,
There's not a lot of households that would
no.
necessarily do that.
It would be like, hey, I'll talk to them. That they won't ever do that again. Kind of like suppressing that, that creativity. But yeah, the fact that your father was just like, hey, she's gonna be who she's gonna be. We're gonna encourage that. So that's fantastic. So, kind of going in terms of that way with cosplaying, you are known on Instagram as CustsceneAddict. Give us the story behind that and how you got into cosplaying.
Well, the name itself, CustsceneAddict, it comes from the fact that way back when I was a wee lass, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, a video game cutscene or animated movie-like scene was a treat. If you were playing a video game and you got to the final boss or an important big moment in the story, and that cutscene would play, and it was very dramatic and animated, and usually the graphics were a lot better too. I loved that. I just thought that was the coolest piece of cinema. So I became affectionately known as Cutscene Addict because I love cutscenes so much. So that's kind of where that handle comes from. I got into cosplay before I knew what cosplay was, which is, I think, the case for many cosplayers. I just liked dressing up and I liked stories. So I would naturally dress up as my favorite characters. Like I said, Philippe was my first quote unquote cosplay. And then I've probably been doing it on a more professional scale for, I want to say, maybe 12, 13 years, going to conventions, making my own costumes, buying some. That's kind of how I got into cosplay.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah, when you were talking about cutscenes in video games, that brought me all the way back to my days of playing like the first Kingdom Hearts.
How did I know you were going to say that, Josh?
It's one of my favorite games. However, during the initial release on the PS2, if you failed at that final boss or that interaction, you would have to watch the cutscene over and over and over, and to the point where on Reddit, on the subreddit for Kingdom Hearts, that's why people know those lines by heart. It's because they had to watch it over and over and over again. But thankfully, with updates to the game over the years, you can just skip it so that you don't have to watch the cutscene at Halo Bastion over again.
That specific one, my sister and I got to the point where we memorized it and we would just quote it. It's like, all right, this time you're Donald, I'm Riku. Let's go,
Oh, good. Okay. So also segueing into one of your other facets, as an anime fan, what are your top 5 anime, either of all time or current season or a combination of both?
Top 5. So I love when anime and theology crosses over. So any anime where there's a heavy emphasis either on Christian theology or just religion and theology in general, that's going to get my attention. That's a conversation I want to be part of. So my number one is Trigun, specifically the Trigun manga. It would be my favorite of all time. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the podcast when we're talking about our topic today. In no particular order, after Trigun, some other ones that have meant a lot to me over the years and that I've really gotten deep into studying. One would be Death Note. One would be Captain Harlock. That's an old school one, but I love Captain Harlock. I always describe it as if C.S. Lewis created an anime, it would probably be Captain Harlock, because it's about a story of young people getting on the spaceship of this captain, going on these magical adventures, and as they're on the ship, they're growing, they're changing, he's changing them, and ultimately they go back to their own world as the people they're meant to be. So it has this very kind of C.S. Lewis Narnia-esque vibe to it. I love Captain Harlock. Vinland Saga, I love. Again, some crossover thematics with Trigun in Vinland Saga. If I had to pick just one more, I love this Netflix film called Blame. It's actually pronounced blam, like the sound of a gun when you fire it. So nobody calls it that. It looks like blame, so that's what we call it. And it's just a nice story about faith that really speaks to me as a person. So those are 5 that I really love. They're very personal picks. They're kind of like personal cult classics for me. I don't expect everyone will love them or get them in the way that they personally speak to me, but those would be 5 of my favorites.
Wow, that's so interesting. I've never heard of Captain Harlock and then Blame. Um, I hadn't heard of those. That sounds really interesting. We may need to check those out, Josh.
Yeah, because we've watched Vinland Saga,
Hmm.
as our listeners know, we did a whole episode on that, and Death Note. I'm watching it for the second
Upcoming.
time, and that's actually going to be an upcoming episode.
Yep.
So really excited about that as well. So, kind of wrapping up our interview here, um, as I described you as a Jane of all trades, are there any current projects you're working on that you can divulge details on, or what are you currently working on?
Well, I'm always doing voice acting. So I'm currently involved in several different audio dramas. I can't disclose details on those, but one of them I'm working on right now. I play an evil, villainous AI robot, which has been a blast because I get to work with voice filters and do a lot of evil laughing and things that in day to day life you just don't get to do. So that's been really fun. The other project I'm working on is I'm putting together a devotional that is an anime Christianity crossover devotional. The tentative title is going to be something like 30 Days of Anime, a Christian devotional, something along those lines. There's already a fantastic series of devotionals out there called Finding God in Anime. I think you may have had them on your podcast actually in the past, some of the contributors to that. It's a wonderful devotional. I'm working with them on the 3rd volume. I'll be contributing a few pieces to that. This project would be a little different than theirs. Theirs are these beautiful, pithy, quick reads that you can pick up. You can read when you wake up. You can read when you go to bed. The one I'm working on is a little longer. So it's going to be more analysis style pieces so that I can bring something different to the market because they're already covering that part beautifully. So I'm doing something a little bit different. But those are a couple projects that I'm working on right now, in addition to new cosplays, building things, sewing things. My living room looks like an absolute mess right now. It's like a tornado went through it.
I mean that describes our bedroom currently, but
It's an everything place. Yeah.
nice.
That's really neat though that you're working on audiobooks. Is there anything that's currently out that you have done work on that people could find on like Audible or something like that?
That's a great question. So I'm pulling up the name of it right now. There's an audiobook and it just started releasing on YouTube. It's going to be available on other platforms. It's called The Bell Ringer, and it's a original story. It's inspired by the Redwall series. So if you have ever heard of or read the Redwall series with the anthropomorphic mice, it's kind of a King Arthur-y type story, but with mice and squirrels and rats and weasels. I'm part of a original story, kind of inspired by the Redwall series. I play a bat and a rat, and the first couple chapters of that are out now on YouTube. If you want to check that out, I've done a couple other smaller projects that are out, and the rest are still in development. I've been working on some of them for about a year now, but it takes time for them to release sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. I'll have to go check out some of the works that are up.
Yep, another book to add to your collection.
Yes, I'm a serial audiobook listener.
Yeah, we just finished a time travel series the other day, and I'm like, yeah, that was a great story. And Becky's like, okay, next book. You're like, no, not yet.
No time to rest.
Right? We gotta listen to things. Yeah, I'm excited because the next series that we're gonna do, I've already caught up. There's 10 books in the series right now. It's called He Who Fights with Monsters, and it's fantastic. It's a lit RPG, so it's like as if it's like an isekai gaming simulation situation in a book series, and it's fantastic. There's lots of philosophical conversations that happen in it. It is so good. Love it.
That sounds right up my alley. You will have to drop a link to that in the comments section so we can all check that out.
Definitely.
All right, speaking of philosophical conversations, let's get right into our discussion for today's episode. Really excited about this one. Now, Casey, you had recommended this series that I don't think Rebecca or myself would have picked up on a whim, but we're glad that you recommended it because we thoroughly enjoyed it. So, Casey, what are we going to be discussing today in terms of the series?
So today we are discussing Trigun Stampede, which is the latest adaptation of the Trigun manga. We're going to be talking about a few different things in the series. I'm going to start just by talking about how it was rebranded from a visual standpoint. I think there's a lot of interesting psychology that went into that. We're going to really be focusing on the characters' philosophies and archetypes. We're going to be talking about Vash and Nye as Christ and Antichrist archetypes, respectively, something that I think even someone who's not deep into theology picks up as they watch the show because it's not particularly subtle. But we're going to dive into how they are portrayed, what their belief systems are, and then how we look at that through a Christian lens, because there's a lot of good meaty content in this to discuss.
Oh, yeah. It is rich with information.
Yes. Just so many memorable moments and the interaction between Nye and Vash, especially, just those two conflicting philosophies that they hold to. So, Casey, go ahead and give us a synopsis of what Trigun Stampede is about.
Sure. So Trigun Stampede, it's essentially about a character named Vash. He is not a human being, but he's forced to live among a group of humans who have colonized a planet. And he's really serving as a mediator between two species. One are the human beings who are just trying to survive, and the other is the plant race, which are these sort of interdimensional life forms. They're sort of extraterrestrial looking, and the humans rely on them to survive. The plants provide energy, food, nourishment, chemical technology. And Vash is the mediator between these two cultures. And because of that, he gets into a lot of trouble. The humans don't necessarily love him, and the plants don't always understand him. So we'll talk a little bit about his story, his origins, things like that. I can also pull up a summary if you want me to actually read the summary for Trigun Stampede, because that was just me off the top of my head.
I thought that was a really good representation of what the story is about. I would probably add just that it really centers around the two brothers in the story and what it is that they go through. And one has one idea of how to save their existence. They're pretty opposing in those views, and how do they deal with it. So that's the only thing I would really add to what you said. I thought it was really good.
Awesome. So my question for you before we get started, was this your first touch point ever for Trigun, or had you seen the original anime?
Yes.
No,
So,
this was the
no,
first
first
time for
time.
anything Trigun related.
Right, because I'd seen like the thumbnail on Crunchyroll for Trigun, and I'd seen like graphics and like scenes here and there, but never like really like picked it up. And then I saw Trigun Stampede, and my initial thought was like, oh, is this a sequel? But I didn't see it as a reboot or a prequel more so.
Yeah, it was only when we got towards the end that I was like, this really feels like a prequel situation. That it's setting up characters that people already know and love. Um, but it was a great standalone. If you've never seen anything related to Trigun, it does a really good job of introducing everything.
And that was the challenge faced by Studio Orange when they took on this project. Trigun, it was first released in 1995 as a manga, and then in 1998, they started turning it into an anime series. The problem was, much like many other anime series at the time, the manga wasn't finished yet. And so when they made this anime, they couldn't really follow the manga all the way through. They had to come up with a different ending than what the manga did. Many anime of that era had this issue. Fruits Basket did, and Fullmetal Alchemist did, where the anime had to make up an original ending. So what Stampede does is it follows the beats and the lore of the original manga that the original anime could not fully complete. While at the same time, Stampede is a prequel and a reboot. So what Studio Orange really faced the challenge of is how do we get the old fans on board with this new story? Because it looks very different than the original Trigun does, and we'll talk about that. But also, how do we bring in new fans who have never heard of Trigun? How do we get Gen Z interested in Trigun as a story? And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I think you might find this kind of interesting. Do you see in the Google Doc, I actually put a picture of the original Vash and the Trigun Stampede Vash. So I just want to play a little game of spot the differences here. And I'm going to very briefly talk about this because this is just from a psychological standpoint. I think this is really fascinating. What differences do you notice between these two takes on Vash?
Yeah. So stand out in a way. Obviously, it's brighter, more vibrant colors in the reboot rather than the original. Vash looks a bit, I guess, more like serious in this image. He's more carefree, happy-go-lucky. Even though the show is not that. In the new image, it's more color in his like arm, rather than just like a rusted off, appendage that is what it looks like in the original, at least.
You're nailing it. This is perfect. So here's what you're picking up on. One Vash was written for a millennial generation. This new Vash is written for Gen Z.
Yeah. Are you trying to say that we're a crusty appendage?
I am, yes. There's a difference, though, in how these generations interpret information and storytelling. So Gen Z, and this is a very broad generalization, but it's based on empirical studies, they like information up front. They don't want to wait around for episodes and episodes and episodes to figure things out. They're like, tell me the facts, tell me who this guy is. Why should I care? What is his story? If you look at Stampede Vash, and you picked up on this, it's immediately obvious he has a prosthetic arm and it's cybernetic. So we know right away, this guy's not normal. There's something about him that is inhuman. He's actually been artificially enhanced. If you look at the original Vash, that's not necessarily a prosthetic arm we're looking at. That could be just a long glove. It could be part of his duster getup. We don't know that. In the original Trigun, all of Vash's secrets are slowly revealed throughout the course of the anime. I can't remember how many episodes it is off the top of my head, but it takes 12, 15, 18 episodes for some of these things to come out. Vash has a fake robotic arm. Vash is from outer space. Vash is a skilled gunman. These are not things that are obvious until many episodes into the story. That's part of the joy of the original Trigun. Who is this guy? Where did he come from? He's so different. In Stampede, we get all of this in the first episode. The opening scene, this guy's from outer space. He's got a fake arm. It falls off when Meryl runs up to him in the desert. And it's like, oh my word, he's got a fake arm. What is this? We know he's a skilled gunman because at the end of the first episode, he takes his gun out and he saves the city. So immediately, we know who this guy is just by looking at him. We can see the gun on his hip. We can see the fake arm. We can see the space jacket. We know he's from outer space. He's wearing a space coat. The other thing that you picked up that's really interesting is this Vash looks a lot more awkward. He's a little more carefree, but he's also kind of shy. He's kind of embarrassed. And this is something Gen Z really relates to, is this awkward feeling of growing pains. And they're much more open when they talk about things like mental health and what I'm going through and things like that. So I just love how Studio Orange took Vash, and just by looking at him, you can see the difference in the generation and which generation he's speaking to. And then the challenge, of course, is our generation, the millennials, are looking at this new Vash going, is that still Vash? He's so different than I remember him. Am I still going to connect with him? And so, of course, at the end of the show, they do something very brilliant and they give him his original haircut. As you can see there in the picture, his hair goes straight up. He gets a black coat, which is a very obscure reference to the manga that only the original readers would catch. So all that to say, Studio Orange put a lot of thought into this. There's a lot of psychology just visible on Vash as a person in that generational appeal. So that was something I just wanted to start the conversation with because I thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I'm glad that you really went through and explained all of that. I find it interesting too that, and this is particularly true in that picture that you posted. I know because in the show, his coat is definitely red. It's definitely a red color. But the coloring really reminds me of Baruto and how that is sort of a reboot of Naruto for the new generation. So it seems like they did very similar things to characters to make them a little more relatable to the current generation.
Absolutely. I would agree. And I think even it's kind of a TikTok look, for lack of a better word. Vash in Stampede, he's got the comb over hair and he's got the little blush mark on his face. He kind of has that e-boy, TikTok look to him, which was a big influence, I think, on his design. Very popular with Gen Z.
Speaking about the original, again, we hadn't seen it. From what I read, though, it sounded like that it was very what you're talking about. Like Gen Z is like, "Hang on with the facts. I want the story. Who is this person? What's going on?" Whereas the original Trigun was a lot more slower pacing. Is that correct?
Correct. The appeal of it was discovering who Vash was. He comes into the scene and all you know is he's wanted and he's funny. And somehow he gets out of every scrape he's put in. But as you watch each episode, these truths start coming out about his powers and about his abilities and about his origins that makes you want to keep watching because it's so much deeper than you thought it was from the first episode. Whereas again, Stampede right away hits you with it in that first episode.
Sounds like it's not the slow progression of like ClanAd, is it? Because ClanAd to me was very slow.
ClanAd, and this is just my opinion, but ClanAd to me really gets good in the second season. You have to watch a long time, to get to that second season. But again, attention spans were different, information processing different. So you gotta think about these things when you're retelling stories, and we see this in the Gospels, right? So if we look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we look at who the audience was for each of those, Mark gets right into the action. He's like, my readers don't care about the genealogy. They don't care about proving this, that, and this. They just want to know, who was Jesus? What did he do? What was he involved in? So you do have to think about, if we're applying this idea to a Christian lens, you've got to think about, who's my audience? How do I speak to them? Where are they coming from? What ideas are they bringing to the table that I need to be able to connect with? And as a character, that's something Vash does very well. So I think we should talk a little bit about what we see in Vash as a character, because as you were already saying, Vash and Nye, they have very different philosophies about what it means to be human, what it means to be redeemable. What is salvation? How do we bring salvation to the world as we know it? And I would go so far as to say that archetypally, Vash is a Christ figure and Naya is an antichrist figure. And we can kind of talk about that. Did you see some of that as you were watching it?
One scene that I want to point out in particular, especially the colors that are used in the last episode, episode 12, we see this big battle between Nye and Vash. And if you notice the colors that are involved, Nye is dressed in white, which is usually says purity, righteousness, holiness, and Vash is clothed in black, which is usually evil, bad, void of any like joy. However, the dynamics between the two are the difference, like yin and yang. Whereas yin, even though Nye represent that in his mind is saying, "Hey, let's build a paradise here. Let's make a new heaven and a new earth," kind of like reminiscent of that, and just abandoning all civilization, all humans. But Vash, bringing that Christ archetype again, is saying, "Hey, I know humans are messed up there, they're scattered, they're sinners, but I'm here to still bring some clarity, to bring, salvation in a way to help them. And then we had Nye, the Antichrist archetype, saying, well, that they're a lost cause, they're worth it. They belong, in the eternal damnation. This is what they deserve. How can you look at what they're rejecting you?
Yeah, and I think that's what the colors represent, honestly. I think black is because humanity rejects Vash. The whole the whole show, he's the one who's the wanted character when really it's his brother Nye who is doing all of these terrible things, and humanity just can't see it. They can't see it. And how true, like when the Antichrist comes in, um humanity is going to prop this person up as a god. And we do this with idols in our lives today, even. We could do it with anything, you know? And we see that that's it. We like, oh, that's a good thing. But then Vash, yeah, he's seen as not good enough or not whatever, not there. I found it really interesting too while we're talking about that last episode, where one is white, one is black. Their wings that they have are on opposite sides, and it almost symbolized to me like if they could just come together in unity, they would be able to fly perfectly. And I think that's such an important and integral part of the gospel, and so many, particularly of Paul's writings, where he talks about unity of the church, unity. It's so important, and if we could only learn to look at both sides of the story and listen to each other, and accept each other, then it things would be better. It would be smoother.
Absolutely. I love this conversation about the black and white and what it made me think about. And they haven't said this outright in the show, but I wonder if you feel the same way about this. There's a scene where Rem, their foster mother, is talking to them about their abilities, and Nye is the true born plant. He's got all the plant powers. He can manipulate energy. He's very powerful. He's very plant-like. He wears the white. He has the holy persona about him. Vash can only take in. He can only eat, drink, devour, consume. Even his arm. There's a scene where Vash loses his arm, and it creates this vortex, and it starts, sucking stuff in. It's almost like Vash can absorb while Nye can create. And what it makes me think of with that black is something that has been soiled or dirtied. And if you think about Vash's, even his physical body, it's covered in scars. Every time he touches a human being, he's shot at, he's kicked, he's cut, he's wounded. And it's kind of like he's absorbing all that hate. He's taking on all that sin in a way. That's his gift. He's meant to be the one that petitions on behalf of humanity. And I think even when he's working with the plants and you see him touching their hands and using his powers when they're turning red and they're going out of control, my theory is he's actually absorbing all of that chaos, all of that negativity. We could call it sin if we want, because he is the mediator between the plants and the humans. That's his role, which again feels very Christ-like, as he's taking on the sin of the world on our behalf as our mediator. And like you said, Nye, very judgmental of humans. And I think it's interesting. Did you notice he was reading the Bible as a child in that one episode? And he's looking at it and he's saying, humans, they act like they want to change, but they never change. And we know he's taken some of that teaching to heart, because in episode 3, he references the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah when he destroys that human settlement. And then later at the end of the episode, when him and Vash are kind of butting heads, and Vash says, I can't turn against humanity. And Nye says, then be crucified on behalf of the sinners if you wish. So he knows, it's interesting how Nye almost knows the gospel. And he sees that in his brother. He's like, you're trying to do this, brother, and you can't see how messed up humans are. They're going to kill you. They're going to revile you. And Vash has this great line where he says, even if they hunt me, I'll just run away. And when things have settled, I'm going to gently come back to them over and over and over as long as it takes. It made me think about in the Bible how it'll say, I stand at the door and knock. God's not barging in our house and knocking down our doors. He's there. He's gentle. He's saying, I want to help. And you can shun me. You can walk away as many times as you want. I'm going to keep coming back until I get through. So that's something I see in Vash too, from a Christ standpoint.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I 100% see that as well. Very eloquently put. All of that. He is very much a Christ-like figure in the story.
And I want to talk about the character of Wolfwood for a moment, because such an interesting person, because he's literally carrying his cross,
Quite literally, yes.
and it's a weapon, just like we use the Bible, we call it the sword in some instances, and so Wolfwood. Casey, what is your overall, feelings towards this character, and why do you think there's such a critical part to the story?
I love Wolfwood. I think we all relate to him a little bit because he's someone who is deep in sin and he knows it, but he feels like he has no choice. He commits atrocities because of people he loves. And he says, I don't believe in God. There's an episode where he just outright says, I don't believe in God. So I have to take this into my own hands. And this is a cruel world. And to protect the people I care about, I will bloody my hands so they don't have to. So in a way, in a twisted way, Wolfwood is a very humanist Christ figure. He says, I'll be the sinner so these children at the orphanage and my friend Livio don't have to be. And of course, that backfires because Livio, regardless of what Wolfwood does, follows him because he loves him. And Livio ends up just as deep in this life of crime and atrocity as Wolfwood does. And I think Vash touches Wolfwood because he sees what Wolfwood is truly. He sees his heart. He knows you're doing these really bad things, but you're not. You're doing it because of love. And it's sad that you have to do this because of love. But at the same time, Wolfwood sees Vash's actions as very hypocritical. He says, you're dying to save people, but you don't care about yourself. Isn't that kind of a hypocritical thing as well? But Wolfwood, I don't want to spoil his story. All I will say is in the original Trigun, what put Trigun on the map as a Christian coded story is Wolfwood actually does get saved in the original Trigun. There's a scene where he goes into a church, he confesses, he repents, and it's the closest thing I've ever seen to a salvation scene in an anime. So I hope we get to see some of that in Trigun as well. But he's the repentant sinner. He's the thief on the cross is kind of how I see Wolfwood. But what are your takes on Wolfwood as a character? Because I agree, he is fascinating.
That is so exciting to hear that that is part of his story a little later on. Yeah, Wolfwood is really interesting. It's like it's us trying to do life in our own strength. That we think that we can do everything ourselves apart from God. And we don't need that. We don't need God. God's a crutch, maybe. Even though Wolfwood literally uses his cross as a crutch in some scenes, and I find that really interesting. Obviously, it doesn't go so well for him, and it doesn't go so well for us either. To try to do things in our own strength. And going back to Vash just for a moment, Vash really has unconditional positive regard for every single person.
Even the villains that come after him,
Yes.
and I think where he goes to the city in episode 1 and 2, there's this evil duo that comes after him, and the henchman's or the evil villain's like son is like going off the edge, and I was very surprised. Like, okay, well, there he goes. And actually, no, I'm going to save him.
Mhm.
And he rallies people around him, like, hey, let's be united, for this one cause. We have differences, but let's be united in this one thing that we can do that is good, that is redeemable.
And he does this for Wolfwood. Like you were saying, Casey, he sees into him as a person. It's that I'm deep in theory class right now, as we talked about earlier. But
Do it, Rebecca, do
it
it.
is, I'm specifically writing a paper right now on person centered therapy. And so Vash really embodies this. It's a very humanistic theory, like existentialism. It's actually kind of a part of existentialism. But anyway, so part of person centered therapy, or the theory behind it, is first of all, that unconditional positive regard. So looking at your clients, or looking at, in Vash's case, the people around him, say, Wolfwood, um, seeing them, yes, recognizing that there is, um, capacity for evil, but also great capacity for good, and viewing that person with unconditional positive regard. And not only that, but then seeing, having advanced empathy, which is where you see, not only can you understand what it is that they're going through, and you can feel that, with the person that you're talking to, but also that you can hear what they're not saying. You can hear what's going on under the surface. And Vash is authentic, and he provides congruence. So it's congruence, that authenticity, and the empathy that creates an atmosphere for unconditional positive regard. And Vash is all of those things, with every single person that he meets.
Not just the humans, but I mean, one of my favorite scenes is at the end of episode 3. Everything's been destroyed, and there's that little cage of glowing fireflies. And your average person would say, after so much destruction, what's the point? But he takes the time to pick up the box and let them go, so they can be free, so they don't stay in that cage, because no one else is going to free them. It doesn't matter if it's a baby, if it's an animal, if it's a person, no matter what that person has done. Like you said, he sees the value in life, and he sees the value in souls. And I think, as Christians, something that really speaks to me about Vash is, a lot of times both sides are angry at him. The humans are angry at him, the bad guys are angry at him, the plants are angry at him, because he doesn't take it. He's not on anyone's side. He's on the side of forgiveness and the sanctity of life. There's a scene in, like you were talking about, with the Nebraska family in the second episode, where the one is going to fall off the cliff, and the mother comes up and says, this is our chance. Let's get rid of them. They caused us all this suffering. And Vash says, no, like, let's help them. And the people, the humans who previously were like, we love you, Vash, you're so helpful, now they're angry at him, because he's standing between these two dueling forces. And I think, as Christians, sometimes we find ourselves in that position because, Christ found himself in this position. Why are you with the publicans and sinners? Why would you hang out with the tax collectors? People were always angry at him. But he said, I don't go to the people who are well. I go to the people who are sick. I don't care who that is. These people need me. And what I admire about Vash is his ability, like you were saying, to look into someone's soul and empathize with them and say, I see your pain. And I think some of that comes from the fact that Vash himself feels he has done a lot of wrong, and he has a lot to atone for. There's a verse that says, there's unto whom much is given, much shall be required, but there's another one, and it's something about he who has been forgiven much, forgives much, or loves much. And that's what I think of when I see Vash. He feels so guilty for some of the things he's done that it helps him understand where Wolfwood is coming from, and where all these other people who are hurting are coming from. And at the end, you hear him say, I'm going to find a way to save humans, plants, and my brother, all of them. They're not even on the same side per se, but I'm going to save all of them. So I love that observation. Um, do you think he's going to be successful with Wolfwood? Do you think he'll get through to him?
I think he's already kind of starting to. Um, towards the end of season one, yeah, I think slowly that's kind of what was starting to happen. Or if nothing else, he was planting a seed, you know, that I think is very possible could grow and be cultivated by other people in his life.
I agree. And I think a common theme that all the characters represent is atonement. They've all done something they regret. So I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about how did you see the characters trying to atone or find redemption for the things that they had done? Or how do you think they define redemption? What were some of your thoughts on that?
So going back to Wolfwood, we in the original series he has that salvation moment, which we don't see in Stampede, but I think there is a line that you had actually written um, down the notes, something along the lines of that Wolfwood has to, sin the most or have the greatest atonement so that he, I guess, absolves the sins of everybody else. So by taking on the greatest risk, that I think is his view of atonement, where if I do such and such, I'll have a chance at salvation or a chance at redemption, and that goes again doing faith by works is what it reminds me of, which or sorry, salvation by works, which again some people hold to that view. I don't personally. Salvation is a gift. We do nothing on our own there; it's to earn it, but it's only receive it that we should want to grow in a relationship because that's what it all boils down to. So that's my take on at least Wolfwood. Rebecca?
Yeah, I would agree, Josh, with everything that you were saying. That's his atonement. We've talked quite a bit about Vash and his idea of atonement, in that he feels like he was responsible for the crash of the Seeds project or all the spaceships with the people, and he's really taking that on himself. Um, some of the other characters, uh, I mean, we've got Nye. I forgot his name for a second.
Nye is fascinating. Now, did you catch his definition of paradise was a place where plants have souls. He says we're going to recreate the plants so they're like us, they're made after our image, and they have souls, and it's just plants. We're going to annihilate humans altogether because they are beyond redemption. And I think a big part of what Trigun talks about is, do you believe redemption is possible or not? That defines a lot of the characters' worldviews. In the very first episode, when Roberto and Meryl are driving in the truck and Roberto is kind of giving you an idea of what this world is like, he says, it's a kill or be killed, dog eat dog world, and you've got to do what you got to do to survive. And Wolfwood later echoes this. He says, you only get one life. You have to fight for it no matter who you hurt in the process. There's no other way to survive. Um, and because they have this mentality, things aren't going to get better. There is no way out. It is up to us. We have to take all this in our own hands. Um, that leads them to beliefs like Wolfwood's, where he says, there's that episode with Rolo, the little boy who is sick and gets turned into the monster. Vash is trying to save him. He still sees the humanity. He says there's still a chance. We can still save this kid. That's the promise I made to him. And Wolfwood says, I just see someone who's suffering, and the only way to save them is to eliminate them. There is no hope. So it's really kind of the difference between a hopeless worldview and a hopeful worldview. Uh, is there hope? Wolfwood's kind of on the there is no hope side. Vash says there is hope, and I'm going to keep trying until I see the hope. What do you think about some of the other characters? Where do you think they kind of fall in that spectrum of thought?
Yeah, so I mean, trying to remember all of the characters. There's quite a few characters. There's the worm. I don't remember who it is. Zazie? Yeah. Yeah, he's interesting. He's kind of a floater. He's like he's not really on anyone's side. He's on the side of his planet. What's going to be best for the planet? And he's kind of siding with the plants right now. Um as because he thinks that they'll be mm, better to the planet, I guess.
Yeah, humans keep messing it up. So
Yeah, so he's pretty okay with just wiping him out. He's like, that's kind of fine with him.
yeah, he kind of represents nature, and it's like even nature itself is recognizing it doesn't matter what we're looking at. If we're talking about morality, if we're talking about ethical use of resources, humans are bad at this thing. There's not much to redeem in them. Another character I think is really interesting is Conrad, who's the scientist who was on the siege ship, and survived and now works for Nye. Did you catch kind of some of his philosophy toward the end of the show?
Yeah, towards the very end, he was really talking about really kind of on the side of Nye, where he was like, we haven't done anything good, is what I got from it. And that yes, he was more interested in the scientific process, I think, though. He wasn't necessarily interested in theology or anything like that. He was just like, yes, can we do this thing? Can we give souls to these plants? Um, and then just wipe out the rest of humanity? Like, I don't know, it's almost like he believed the plants were like gods because they came from this other spiritual world. And that's what he was more interested in.
And he's trying to create a race that is more like them. It's not outright said, but it's almost implied that the creatures, the beings he's creating are like a hybrid of human and plant. Um,
Hmm. Transhumanism.
right, transhumanism, absolutely. We're getting into some juicy stuff here. And a line that really hits me is when he's talking to Roberto and Meryl, and he's kind of confessing to them, these are all the things I've done. He has a guilt complex too because of what he did to Tesla, who was that independent plant that was before Vash and Nye, and how the humans treated her. He has a lot of guilt that I think he's siding with Nye partly to assuage that guilt. I hurt your kind in the past. But there's a line he says to Roberto and Meryl where he says something along the lines of, I created them, I modified these humans like Wolfwood, and I made them stronger, but they still hungered and they still thirst. And of course, the verse that comes to my mind is where Christ says, those who come to me will never hunger and will never thirst. And like you're saying with that transhumanism, despite his efforts to play God, Conrad cannot get beyond the bounds of his humanity, and he has no ability to give anyone that power. Kind of an interesting commentary on that.
Yeah, and it's almost like he and Wolfwood are pretty similar in that they're trying to atone in their own strength rather than accepting the free gift of God that is offered.
Absolutely. And I think what is really unique about Trigun is it's one of few stories that are not simply influenced by Christianity. Christianity is in this world. This is a part of the world building. And it becomes more and more obvious as you go through this story. These humans that have colonized this planet came from Earth. And so, of course, they have Christianity, and Nye is reading a Bible and referencing Sodom and Gomorrah and referencing crucifixion. And in the manga, there's even a scene where Vash goes into a church and the salvation message is being preached, and he's listening to it, and he has all this guilt in his heart, and he's thinking, how can that be? I've done so much wrong. No one can forgive me. This can't be how it is. And I think that's what makes Trigun special, is you see how Christianity is actually a part of this world. So when you're talking about Vash as a Christ figure, there's basis for that. There's intention behind that. There's various theories as to why Trigun is that way. Some of it has to do with the genre. It's a space western, which originated in America. And of course, Christianity is a big part of America. So that religion kind of came with the world building. The other rumor is that the author converted to Catholicism. Specifically, he was raised Buddhist and converted later in life. All of his stories have Christianity embedded in them in some way. So he wrote Trigun, he wrote Gungrave, and he wrote one called Blood Blockade Battlefront. And Christianity is a part of all of that. Kind of a tangent, but it gives more context to what we're talking about here.
To see an anime that's so overtly, just riddled with Christian themes, that's not something that we see a lot of. We have, hints here and there, and we can kind of pull things out. This was really, I'll say, easy to draw parallels from. So I really appreciated that. And just the overall story as well. As a side note, I was, Ridley and I were talking the other night about the whole lay of the land and the archetype and everything that goes within it. The lay of the land, the world that they're in, kind of reminds me of like Dune and also Mad Max in a way. Did you pick up on that?
Oh, absolutely. The E.G. Mine character villain in the third episode looks like he came right out of Mad Max. So there's a lot of, and the author is a big fan of American comic books. So you'll see a lot of influence. Quick fun fact, in the episode with Rolo, where he turns into that big creature, his name is Monev. And when you spell Monev backwards, it's Venom. The character was inspired by Venom from the Marvel comics. So yes, there is very much a Western influence in Trigun. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. There was we were talking about maybe it's just because of the guns and the sort of Western feel, but it kind of felt a little bit too like I think it was season 2 of I've just lost it. Josh, help me out. Sword Art Online.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I was like, what is that? Whatever the gun game one
Oh,
was.
Gun Gale Online.
Yeah, Gun Gale Online. It reminded me kind of that, which was fun.
That is fun. So my other question for you two is, which character did you relate to the most? For any reason? Was there a character that just jumped out at you and you're like, ooh, that hit home. Like I feel that.
I don't want to be the obvious person, but I'm gonna say I will say Vash. Just because I do relate to him, like just having like hope in even like the darkest of circumstances. I'm always, an optimist, in a way. Not that like I'm there in my head in the sand and I think everything is sunshine and roses, but I do have that everlasting, hope, the hope that we have as, believers, and just his like determination to seek out the most troubled and the most hurt in the world and try to bring some sense of normalcy and some sense of safety. So
Yeah.
yeah, I would say Vash.
Yeah. Definitely Vash, but to be
Oh
different.
yeah, copy my answer.
I know. To be a little different, I do actually really relate with Meryl because she is like this newbie. I mean, to without a but not a better word. She's very much a newbie, and she is just trying to figure out what's going on. Who is this person? And I can really empathize with her story because she is. If we're looking at Vash as this Christ character, she messes things up, but she keeps following Vash and like, well, who is he? I really want to know who he is. And that serves her well in the end. She doesn't let go, she doesn't run away. And I think that's very commendable of her to, like I said, if we're thinking of Vash as this Christ character, um, to continue running after Christ, no matter what's happening, because the world is falling apart around her. They get into crazy situations, and yet she remains faithful, even when her partner, who's teaching her the ropes, Robert, I think, he's like, "Come on, newbie, it's time to go. We got to leave." And she was like, "No, I don't. How can we leave right now? Like this person needs us." needs me. And so I really liked her character a lot.
Yeah, Roberto, he kind of represents the older generation that didn't have hope. He has no reason to believe things will get better because he's just watched it stagnate. Meryl comes in and she's young and she's fresh, and Vash enters her life. And I love in episode 2 where after everything's said and done, she looks at him and she goes, "What a weirdo." He's so different. He's so different than everything that's going on. The world says, dog eat dog. Vash says, feed both dogs, become friends. And if the dog bites you, love him anyway, and that's so different to her. So it is kind of like when Christ enters the scene, and everyone has a different encounter with Christ, but I think our first response is not necessarily, what a weirdo, but sometimes it feels that way. It's so countercultural from everything we've either told ourselves or witnessed in the world or believed about ourselves or the world around us. And of course, following Vash is not easy. She just gets in more and more trouble as she follows him, but she can't get away from him because he represents something so true to her. It speaks to her. And I love her character arc. I love how after she sees the suffering people have gone through, it's kind of like Vash rubs off on her a little bit. And that scene on the sand steamer where Roberto's saying, "We're going to die. Like, we're bailing. We're out of here. Our job is to report the facts. We need to survive." And she says, "No, I regret what happened. I don't want that to happen again. I'm going to stand and make a difference." And I think that's Vash. I think that's Vash's influence, which is pretty cool. So, that's awesome. Um, did, well, I think we all relate to Vash in some way. I mean, you covered Vash just as good as I would have attempted to cover him and how I relate to him, because I've always been a big believer in hope. And I love characters who, we were talking earlier about how you said advanced empathy was the term. How he demonstrates that so well. He challenges me every time I watch him to rethink how I treat other people and how I think about other people, because he is able to see right into the hurt. So he's a character that part of me relates to, but a part of me just really admires him. It's like, I want to be more like him. And a lot of that is because I do see Christ modeled in him as an archetype as well. And given the author's conversion to Catholicism, maybe that's intentional. We don't know. It's kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah, he reminds me a lot as a character. Um, he reminds me a lot of Tanjiro from Demon Slayer in that way, that empathy that's displayed, the kindness for both humans and demons alike. All people are deserving of love.
Yeah, and I think that sacrificial love is a big theme in Trigun. We see in the flashback when Vash is kind of taken in by that colony by Ludia and Brad, and they have different feelings about him. But what ultimately convinces Ludia to trust Vash in that critical moment is realizing that a woman named Rem thought Vash was worth dying for. She sacrificed herself because she loved this boy so much. So that sacrificial love is ultimately what bridges the gap between Vash and humans for the first time. And you see Vash modeling that sacrificial love that was kind of instilled in him by Rem, his foster mother. And I love the quote where she says, I've got it written down here, but I just thought this was really interesting. It's the one about, oh, come on, where is it? Oh, maybe you two were gifts sent by God to act as a bridge between humans and plants, like angels. I'm like, it's preaching itself at this point. I don't even have to articulate that. That's very straightforward. So it's a beautiful anime. Did either of you have questions you wanted to bring up for discussion, or just general thoughts, plot points you thought you wanted to kind of dive into a little bit more deeply?
Nothing necessarily philosophical,
Yeah,
but as
true.
far as visually, it was a very interesting visual style that they decided to go with for Stampede.
Yeah, I kind of like. I think this is like cyberpunkish was a bit. Um,
Yeah. Well, yeah, cyberpunk definitely, but then the medium that they used was a very
oh yeah,
3D sort of CGI look.
yeah,
It's
and that
not, yeah, it's not like the
yeah,
typical 2D
right,
animation that we typically see in
yeah.
other animes.
And we've seen like CGI use, like in an episode or two of other 2D animation.
Yeah.
But what I think sets Trigun Stampede apart from the other animes, visually speaking, is that's an integral part to the whole story and the allure of it. Is there's CGI and 3D animation all throughout the series, and it works so seamlessly though
Hmm.
with the 2D.
It does, yeah. And I think that artistic decision really helped to make those fight scenes look so fluid and crisp. It was beautiful how they just the movement that you could see and the details that went into it. I think it was a really good decision to make it. It was a little at first it was like this doesn't look like I would expect it to look. And then, because then you're kind of like, oh, I don't know. How do I feel about this? And then as the time goes on, you're like, okay, yeah, yeah, that was a good decision.
Studio Orange, that's their specialty, is they do 3D animated anime adaptations. They also did Land of the Lustrous was another one that they did. And Naitao, the author of Trigun, he never wants to retell his story the same way. He loves new mediums. He loves remixing the plot and changing the designs. And I think the 3D was a good choice, not just because Gen Z is used to 3D. I mean, every animated film that comes out is 3D at this point, so it speaks to them. But it's also because the fight scenes, like you were saying, are so detailed. I You could do it with 2D, but it would be harder, I think, to capture. And when you read the Trigun manga, the fight scenes are almost ludicrously hard to follow because the author, it's like he can see it in his mind's eye, but he's limited to still shots, trying to capture the action. And I feel like with Studio Orange, they were finally able to take his vision and make it happen. There's the final battle between Vash and Nye. There's parts where it almost looks like a video game when they first transition into the fight, and I could hear the author screaming from all the way in Japan the day it aired because he loves video games, and I could just see the influence. I could see his heart all over that final episode. It was very, very cool to watch. But that was going to be one of my questions was, did you like the animation style? Did you think it added to the story? It sounds like the answer was yes for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
for me, definitely. Yeah, when it all came in down to it, yes, I did enjoy that. And it was, like we said at the beginning, this is not something that we typically would have picked up. We generally don't venture into this genre, but I'm so glad that you suggested it because it was so good. The story was great. The animation is great. We'll definitely keep following along. I assume there's going to be more seasons that are coming out. Do you know?
There is going to be another season. It's supposed to be the last season. So they're going to wrap up the story in the next season, is what I'm hearing. No news on when it's coming out yet, but they are hosting some panels throughout the year at different conventions. The studio is. So hopefully we'll get a trailer or something soon. I'm very excited. It's been hard to wait.
Definitely left the door open in the last episode after the credits.
Most definitely.
So
What do you think's going to happen? And I don't just say this facetiously because obviously I've read the manga. I know how the original story ends, but this one's taking some liberties. What do you think is going to happen next? We were left with some interesting cliffhangers, like is Nye dead? Is Nye coming back? What's happened to Vash? Where's Meryl going? Do you have any predictions or thoughts on where the story might go from here?
honestly, I don't know. I mean, I'm still just trying to just process, everything from the first. To
Yeah, we literally finished it last night. So,
answer your question, I don't know yet.
yeah, I think, yeah, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell where it's going to potentially go. But I mean, it definitely looked like Nye was gone, but at the same time he was reaching for that cube thing, so maybe he like went into the other dimension. I don't know. And then Meryl, definitely, she's taken the place of Roberto at this point. She's the wise one years later in her profession, and she's going to have a newbie, so there'll be that sort of dynamic, which will be interesting. And then um, I don't know, the world. Well, the world is still there, but then we saw at the very end that there's the I don't know more spaceships of humanity that are coming to this planet, and apparently this was like just one portion of humanity. This was the Seeds Project, so that they could go and like start cultivating a society, I guess, and on another planet, and um, that there's more of humanity that's coming. So that'll be an interesting dynamic of, well, what are they going to do when they get there? Um, what are the plants going to do? What happened to those impregnated plants? Like, did they end up giving birth? Or I don't know. That was really weird. I guess we will. Yeah.
I mean, Nye was trying to create an entire race of independent plants with souls. That was his goal. So was he thwarted? Was he not thwarted? I will say, if we're looking at this archetypally, with the Christ and Antichrist archetype, one of the tropes is the death and resurrection and second coming. So we know Nye has died. Is he going to stay dead? If he's following his trope, probably not. He's probably going to come back. Maybe he's going to be reborn through one of those plants. That could be a possibility. Same with Vash. Vash has vanished. We don't know where Vash has gone. Now, if we watch the ending, we know that there's some suspicious figure who's very much like Vash living off in the boonies somewhere under a different name. So again, we've had a metaphorical death. We're going to have a return. So resurrection, metaphorically. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all goes down. I'm excited.
Yeah, same. I have a feeling
Yeah.
we're definitely going to watch the second season.
Most definitely.
And I can't wait to see how they tie in the Christianity. Because like I said, in the original, it's very obvious. In the anime, the original anime, very obvious. So I'm hoping they keep the core message of Christianity, because it does tie into the endings, both endings of the original anime and manga. It's critical. So we'll see.
Well, Casey, we thoroughly enjoyed having you on. I think this has been an invaluable conversation in just discussing the many facets of Trigun Stampede. I think we covered a good multitude of them. Again, there are so many directions that we could have gone on, but I think it was great, how you facilitated and just dived headfirst into this conversation. So, Casey, for those that want to follow you, keep up with what you're doing, where can they find you?
I would say the easiest place to follow me, I am on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me as a professional, Casey Covel on LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me as a cosplayer, I am on Instagram and Facebook under CustsceneAddict or CustsceneAddict Cosplay. I update once a week there. I post a new picture and I post kind of like a small devotional or some food for thought or some encouragement for the week. So you can follow me on there. And that's about it so far. But I'm working on some other online presences.
All right, awesome. That's exciting. Well, until next time, keep those halos shining and stay holy, my friends.